Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to InfoNet standard report training. To run standard reports, you're going to want to click on the reports option on the top navigation menu, and we're going to click standard to get to standard reports. And generally, standard reports provide you with aggregate data, number of people served, and then breakdowns of those people by their various intake data, demographics, socioeconomic information. And these are also the only reports. You have many different kinds of reports. You can see management, exception, ad hoc. Your funders, and specifically, I'm referring to ICADV, DHS, and Chicago DFSS. They only have access to your standard reports. They do not have access to the other reports because many of them do include record level data. So to start out, every standard report has a date range. You can run a report for any date you would like. You can even run a report for one day if you're just looking for data for that particular day. There is this ranges drop-down menu that allows you to just list some commonly used reporting periods. So if I select previous 6 months, it pops the dates in there for me, saves a few keystrokes. The output type, I will demonstrate this a little later, but generally HTML is the default, and that just means the report, once you generate it, it'll produce another web page. If you want to run it as a PDF, you can change the output type to PDF, and that is very helpful if you want to download and save the report or attach it in an email to somebody. And then the CSV output format will actually give you the record level data behind your standard reports. So if your client report shows you've served 50 people, you run the same report as a CSV, you will see 50 rows of each of those people and their client ID numbers and associated intakes. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts behind your standard report. All three of the standard reports also have data filters. So if I click on this filters ribbon, you can see we have demographic filters here where you can select different gender categories, and you can select one or more than one. Any age range. This is particularly useful because the standard reports do have kind of a set age grouping categories. I think like 20 to 29 is one of those categories. Well, if you wanted to query only clients age 20 to 24, you would want to use this filter, and then the report would only display clients that fall within your desired age group. And then race, ethnicity. So we have those demographic filters. These are client location filters, so you can query for clients that live in a particular town, township, county, or zip code, or even state. We have plenty of providers along Illinois state lines that may serve people from other states. So if you wanted to keep it to Illinois or look at how many out-of-state clients you're serving, you could query for that as well. What I want to point out about these client location filters is it represents only where the client lives. One question I will sometimes get from users is when they run a services report and they filter for DuPage County, they may expect to see only the community services they've provided in DuPage County, and it doesn't filter for anything. And that's because that county is not based on where the service was provided. It's based on where the client lives. So that's why this county or the geographic filters are only going to filter based on where the client lives, not where the provider is located or where the service was provided. And then over on the right-hand side are other filters that are useful. You could filter by any one or combination of staff. And as you start typing in these filters, the selection narrows to make it a little easier for you to select somebody. You can filter by service type. So if you only want to see clients that received all the different advocacy services, you could select all of those in here, and it will only pull clients that received those specific services. Offender relationship to victim. Funding filter. This is important when reporting to funders that want grant specific information. And then finally, client type, which simply means if they're a client that was in shelter or a transitional housing program, and walk-in just means they didn't receive either of those services. All their services were walk-in. They did not stay in any of your housing programs. Funders also do not have access to most of these filters. There are a couple exceptions. They do have access to the funding filter. That's necessary because, for example, ICADV needs to run a report that includes your VOCA funded clients and services. So they do have this funding filter. If you have been using InfoNet for a while, you may have noticed that there are messages on the screen notifying you when a funder has run a quarterly VOCA report, and it's prompting you to go in and review and approve it. So funders do have the funding filter. And then specifically DFSS, or the city, has the city or town filter, but they're only allowed to query for Chicago residents and no other town. And that's because they want to make sure the grant dollars are used only among Chicago residents. So they need that filter. And then they also have an ethnicity filter for only the Hispanic Latino population. And that's because they need to report race, I think, by ethnicity, whereas we combined these categories. So this allows them to report what they need to federal funders in the way that they require. Okay, so we'll actually get into the report itself. I'm going to leave the filters off. And just a couple more things I wanted to point out. Some of you may have different InfoNet accounts. If you have multiple locations, this is an optional service InfoNet offers. If you have a main center and then maybe 2 or 3 satellite offices, you have the option to have separate accounts for each of those locations. This one happens to have 2. Some of you only have 1, and that's fine. And these 2 accounts are linked together as an organization, but it allows me to run reports so I can discern from services provided by the main center. If I want data from only those services, I would make sure only the main center is clicked. If I only want services and clients served out of the satellite office, I can just select that. Or if I want the report to include the entire organization's work, I just want to make sure to select both of those locations. Lastly, all 3 of the standard reports contain sub-reports. When you click on any of these, it will by default click all of them. Minor exception here, I'll go over later. But if you only need one of these, you can uncheck what you don't need and just run the demographics report. So you have less to scroll through. Okay, so for my first report, and I've actually already run these just for the sake of time, I'm going to go over the full client information report. It's probably the most common report that you'll be running. And it goes over all the clients you served in a given time period. For this example, I ran it for last calendar year. So it's the calendar year 2023. I didn't apply any filters to this particular report, but if I had, it would display what those are here. And by looking at this report, I know that there have been no filters applied. So the main unit, there's 3 types of units in this report. And what I mean by that is households, cases, and clients. I can see here the number of clients is 34. Is this, are any of you having trouble seeing this? Should I enlarge it a little bit, perhaps? Okay, if you can see it fine, then I'll just leave it as is. So this 34 is a unique number of people. that were served during calendar year 2023. My number of cases will sometimes be a little bit higher. In my case, it's 35. So it's one higher than 34. And that just means that one of my 34 clients had 2 cases during this report period. And then finally, the number of households. That is, if you use the household feature, that is going to be a lower number than the number of clients. It looks like it's, in my case, it's only one lower, it's 33. So that means I don't use my household feature very much in this training center. If I linked all my clients that are grouped as households together, this might be substantially less, some maybe like even half the amount of the number of people. So then you have a count of the number of individual people as well as the number of households. You have breakdowns between adults and children, and then a total, and all these are unduplicated. So I can look at this and be assured that 34 unique individuals were in fact served during this time period. And let's say you need a report, because you may recall from yesterday, adults and children in InfoNet, generally your children are going to be younger than 18, and generally your adults are going to be 18 or older. But there are a few exceptions, such as victims of teen dating violence, you enter as adults, and other situations where a child is entered as an adult, or an adult maybe with special needs as a witness, and you enter that adult, probably wouldn't be that much older than 18, but you might enter that as a child. And often you're asked, well, how many adults, meaning age 18 and older, did you serve? You could use this, but because of the way we classify adults and children in InfoNet, it might be slightly off. So if you want to be 100% certain you are providing that number correctly, I would go down to the age table and count the number of clients between the ages of 0 and 17, regardless of if they're in the adult or the child column. So it looks like here we have one adult who is in the 12 to 13. I would count that person as maybe a minor when reporting to others, asking for that specific information. So just take note of that. We also have breakdowns between new clients and ongoing. And that can look, I know there's various definitions of new and ongoing. I want to be clear that in InfoNet, new really means new. Somebody counted in this grouping means they came to your organization for service for the very first time ever. So for example, let's say I came in for services in 2010. Okay, we're talking a long time ago, 14 years ago. And then I got services for 6 months, and then I left and I didn't need services for a very long time. Fast forward to today, now it's May 2024. I come back to your same organization for services. I have a whole different situation I'm needing help with. I'm already going to have a client ID in InfoNet. So somebody is going to create a case 2 under my same client ID that I had back in 2010. And I'm going to get services. And so that's a very new case because I haven't been around in a while. But in InfoNet, I am still going to be counted as an ongoing client because I did receive services in the past before the start of my report period. So I know sometimes various funders will ask things like, we want to know the number of clients you served for the first time this grant cycle. This report can get you close to that, but not exact. But there is a way to get the exact number for that. So I'll demonstrate that a little later with the ad hoc reports, but it's important to know that this really means new. These 11 people showing up here received service for the very first time in 2023, and they have never received services from our organization before, ever. Okay, so as I scroll down, I also want to point out that some of these categories and tables include mutually exclusive categories, which means a client can only be in one category, or they could be non-mutually exclusive tables, which means a client can be in more than one category at the same time. So client type, this is an example that's a little bit mixed. So walk-in means, and I have 11 people that received walk-in services. That just means that these 11 people did not receive any emergency shelter or were not in any transitional housing program in 2023. So the remainder of my clients, my 34 total clients, all received some type of housing services, whether it was emergency shelter or transitional housing. But these three housing services are not mutually exclusive. So an example would be I come in March and I need shelter. I need emergency shelter, but the shelter on site is full. So your organization gives me a voucher and I stay at a motel for a few days. So I am an offsite shelter client. A few days later, there's a bed that opens up on your on-site shelter. So a few days later, I move from off-site to on-site, and then I'm spending 30 days in your on-site shelter. Then let's say I'm eligible for your transitional housing program, and there's a transitional housing unit available. I'm able to move in. So during that calendar year, I'm going to be counted in all three of these categories because I received all three types of housing services. Gender identity, there's only one category a person can be in at a time. So they're in one or the other, not more than one. That may be changing soon due to some changing requirements, but I won't get into that now because we're not even sure it's going to happen yet. Race ethnicity, this is not mutually exclusive. If I identify as white and Black and Latina, I'm going to be counted in this category, Black African American. I am also going to be counted in the Hispanic Latino category. I am also going to be counted in the white category. I'm also going to be counted in the Black and white category because I checked both those boxes. And okay, that I think is it. So that is why if you were to sum all these numbers here, if you were to sum the individual numbers for each of these race categories, you would get a number that is larger than 34 because there are multiracial clients. So just keep that in mind. I know sometimes funders want you to report your clients served in mutually exclusive race categories, and there is a way to do that I will get to later. But just know that these are, because it's a select all that apply field, people can be counted in more than one of these categories. Okay, so if I scroll down, I think these are pretty self-explanatory, but if you have questions, we will address those as soon as I'm done going through this report. Once I hit this section after age, notice it says adult client information. So from this point downward, we're only looking at data for adult clients. Veteran status, employment, education, all the way down to income sources, income range, number of children. Okay. And then we're about halfway down the report. Now it's displaying data that's only for child clients. So we have what educational level they're at, any child abuse, data we've collected, custody, and lives with. The next section in this client information report is referral source. This is also possible to have more than one referral source for a client. So you may find that the subtotal here, 34, this happens to be equal to the number of people I've served, But if one client had more than one referral source, you might see a higher number here. And then here is your special needs table. This includes both adults and children. You can see disabling condition. These are just summaries of the more detailed table directly above it. And then you have a list of clients by their primary language for those that have limited English. And then here are your presenting issue data, the type of the primary presenting issue location, and then aggregate client information. I don't think anybody uses this. I think this is another piece that's going to be disappearing soon because it used to be required by HUD, but is no longer. And then throughout this report, and this goes for other reports in InfoNet too, not just this one, but you will see unknown, not reported, and unassigned. Now, we talked about unknown and not reported yesterday during the data entry piece. Unknown means it was simply unknown, but the data point was entered as that unknown. Not reported means it's not applicable. You don't collect it systematically for certain clients or all clients, or the client declined to provide that information. Unassigned means that field was left blank. So in this row, I have 4 people with an unassigned, 4 child clients with an unassigned education. It just means that field was left blank, so we don't know what's going on there. Okay, so, and then I think the last piece is residence information, the type of residence your clients live in, again, for adults and children. And then finally, departure information. And this piece is for only those that have been in emergency shelter or transitional housing during the period. So this is a subgroup of people that you've served. Okay, so before we move on, I'm going to show you how to run this same report as a CSV file that I referenced earlier. So if I go back to my standard report, and I'm going to run the same report. So it's for last calendar year. I recommend when you run as a CSV that you only run one sub-report because it's going to be a lot of tables on top of each other, so to speak. So I'm going to select basic demographics. And if I go back to my client information report, just as a refresher, I have 34 clients, 35 cases. So now I'm going to run the same report as a CSV file. So if I click generate, it's going to produce an Excel file. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And it opened over here. So I'm going to bring it over. And now I have a nice list of my 35, I think it was, clients. I might have to expand the columns a little bit. But you can see I have all the demographic information row by row. Okay, I don't know why I have 43 clients. I might have pulled over the wrong report. Hold on a moment. Okay, last calendar year. All right, let me try this again. I'm going to run this report as a regular website, HTML, generate. Okay, so some of you must have been entering data while I was preparing this morning. That's why we have more clients. So you can see I have 42 clients, 43 cases. And if I go back to my CSV file, I have 43 rows, one for each case. Some of you have been busy this morning. That's nice to hear. Okay, and then one more trick I'm going to show you. So let's say I want to take my client information report and I want this in Excel, but I want it in the aggregate data format. I'm going to be looking at my report. I'm going to hit Control A on my keyboard. It selects everything in the report. Then I'm going to open up a blank Excel file. I'm just going to use my same report here, but open a new tab. Okay, so now I have just a blank Excel sheet. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to copy. So I hit Control A to copy all the content in my report. Now I'm going to hit Control C, which copies everything. And then if I open up my blank worksheet, I can just click paste and it drops in there. It looks a little funky at first because it's trying to fit in these rows and columns, but I can just widen the columns. I usually widen column A, and then I'll usually click this box in the upper left corner here of Excel, and then I'll go to format and I'll make the column width. I usually go with 15, but you can do whatever you prefer. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do column width. I meant to do row. Row height, I usually go with 15. And then I adjust as I need to. So then I widen this a little bit. And all this pastes as numeric data. So you can save this, you can add stuff, you can use it to make graphs if you know how to do that in Excel. And you have your entire standard report in aggregate format in Excel.